I am one of those people who fully believes in karma and trusts fate. Even if a person has done something bad to me, then I will just accept it and be sure that in the future, it will be considered for him. Unfortunately, my wife did not think that her actions would soon result in something terrible that she would regret for the rest of her life. Do it with me the way you like. Don't be shy. Oh, of course. Oh, of course. Da. A strong tingling sensation in the man's groin quickly turned into a burning pain in his chest. He screamed as bewilderment took over his mind. A 6'3", 245-pound man should have felt invincible, not in excruciating pain, he reflected. That was his last thought as he fell lifelessly onto the woman. "Ouch, you big fool!" she shouted while attempting to persuade him to budge. "That wasn't amusing, Fred, and you barely lasted 10 minutes. Fred. Freed. Penelope Matter's partner, 29-year-old Fred Desmond, lay motionless, pressing heavily on her, with one of her arms pinned beneath him. She struggled vigorously to free herself from his weight, but he was too large for her, especially now that he was essentially dead weight. Trying to grab her cell phone with her free arm, she found her reach too short to retrieve the device. Tears welled up from both fear and frustration. It was evident to her that today was not going to conclude well. 3 hours later, Penny's body was tingling with numbness when she heard the back door of her home open, signaling her children's arrival. Urgently, she called down to them, instructing them to dial 911 and remain downstairs, avoiding the second floor. Her 15-year-old daughter questioned, "Should we call Dad too?" "No, no," Penny quickly exclaimed. "Just call 911 and wait for them downstairs." Paramedics arrived at the residence within 5 minutes. After ensuring the well-being of the children, they ascended the stairs to discover Penny and her deceased partner. Penny wore an expression of guilt comparable to a child caught with their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. The paramedics exchanged brief smirks, catching Penny's notice. "You may find it hard to believe, ma'am, but this isn't the first time we've encountered such situations," stated the older paramedic. "Apparently, circumstances like this can be extremely stressful, leading to heart attacks." "Yeah, but he was only 29, Penny said in a barely audible whisper. "Then the autopsy should reveal something intriguing for the coroner," added the younger paramedic. The paramedics were taken aback as they turned the body over. Fred Desmond, the charismatic evening news anchor at the Lansing MI-CBS affiliate, had been on a rapid rise to stardom. There were whispers in certain circles that he was poised to take on a major market anchor position soon. After placing the deceased on a gurney and covering him, the paramedics turned their attention to Penny, who had been beneath the man's weight for over 2 hours. Physically, she appeared to be in good condition, but they advised her to seek the help of a mental health specialist. "Being under a dead body is the least of my problems," she admitted with embarrassment. Penny had just donned a fluffy bathrobe when her husband, Dan, burst into the room, panting from rushing up the stairs. "Are you kidding me?" he angrily exclaimed as she retreated from him. Both paramedics positioned themselves in front of the woman. "Mr. Mattern, this might not be the most suitable time and place for this. Your kids are right downstairs," the older paramedic cautioned. Dan sighed and rolled his eyes, his breath uneven, and the paramedics recognized it wasn't due to running up the stairs. "Seriously, Penny, can this situation get any worse?" he exclaimed. "Mr. Mattern, if we sense your wife needs protection from you, we can have the police here in minutes," the older paramedic warned. "I won't lay a hand on her, even though she might deserve it," Dan replied. The paramedics nodded in agreement, and Penny noticed. "Did the kids contact you?" she inquired as they carried the lifeless body out of the house. "No. I spoke to them and you instructed them not to call me." "Wonderful. Perfect. Making the kids cover for you. You're awful, you know that?" Penny retorted. "No, Janet from down the block called me from work when the ambulance arrived. I bet the whole neighborhood already knows what happened," Dan explained. Within half an hour, every news organization in Lansing was aware of Fred Desmond's death, due to the police scanner broadcast. There were discussions in newsrooms about whether to downplay the incident as a professional courtesy or highlight it because of Desmond's prominence in the Lansing community. Upon learning of Fred Desmond's death, Larry Richards immediately recognized the paramedic call's address. It was none other than the residence of his lover, Penny Mattern. The revelation hit him like a shockwave, leaving him both stunned and wounded. Larry and Penny had been engaged in a clandestine affair for just over a year. Without hesitation, Larry sent a text to Penny, expressing his astonishment with a simple WTF. Although Penny saw the message on her phone, her immediate concerns overshadowed the unfolding drama. As the anchor for Lansing's NBC affiliate for 6 years, Larry commanded respect in the community, even though he lacked the career influence of his CBS rival. The news of Penny's alleged involvement with his competitor left Larry both shocked and infuriated. Aware that the news crew would be deliberating on how to cover Desmond's death, Larry called the news editor to share his perspective. Pursue the story aggressively. The news editor, the sole person at the station privy to Larry's affair with Penny, wasn't surprised by Larry's stance and wholeheartedly agreed. This decision wasn't solely fueled by the competitive ratings with CBS. Larry acknowledged to himself that there were personal motives at play. Penny held a notable position within the Lansing community as the executive director of the city's esteemed arts guild. Recognizing the significance of having two prominent figures in the community, the news editor couldn't help but acknowledge the newsworthiness of the situation. Dan bluntly instructed, "Get dressed, head downstairs, and find a way to explain to our children what happened. They'll be staying with your parents for the next few days. Don't go into explicit details, but don't downplay your mistake. The kids are old enough to grasp that you messed up big time. I'll be listening. Call your parents next. Be honest with them, as it's likely to be on the evening news tonight." Penny's eyes widened like silver dollars as the realization of the news coverage hit her. In Dan's presence, she disclosed to their children that she had been unfaithful to their father earlier in the day, in their own bed. The man involved was the popular news anchor Fred Desmond, who had inexplicably passed away during their encounter. "Did you really kill him with sex, Mom?" their daughter Ellie asked genuinely. "Wow." Penny blushed intensely, while Dan grimaced and retreated to the family room. Once Penny and the kids left for her parents' house, Dan calculated the time for their round trip and discussion with her parents. He allocated an hour to focus on crucial tasks, such as securing a good attorney and handling financial matters. In his mind, divorce seemed inevitable. Having known several divorced individuals, including a good friend from the national telecommunications firm where he worked, Dan made calls to seek advice and support. Penny returned approximately 90 minutes later, appearing as though she had endured repeated blows to the stomach. Dan suspected that the conversation with Penny's parents hadn't gone smoothly. Aware of the Fitzmaurice's conservative values, he assumed they were likely distressed by their daughter's infidelity and the impending public revelation. Penny slumped onto the sofa across from Dan's lazy boy. Upon closer inspection, he could see the evidence of heavy crying. "Well, that went as well as could be expected if I expected a terrible situation served on a blazing platter," she lamented. "I guess I deserved that." Dan maintained an impassive expression as he looked at his wife, signaling her to continue. "I'm sorry, Dan, truly sorry," she said. "I apologize for the infidelity, for causing you pain, and for shattering our family in the most public way possible. You have to understand that going public was never part of my plans. Never. I have no idea what happened today. He was only 29. Penny began crying, burying her face in her hands, while Dan remained motionless in his chair. After sobbing for a few minutes, she looked up to find a distant expression in Dan's eyes, a look she had never witnessed from her affectionate husband before. "How long were you involved with him before you caused his demise?" Dan asked calmly. Penny snorted. "I didn't cause his demise," she retorted sharply. "I suppose we've been together for about 3 months. Together. That's a convenient term. It almost sounds affectionate, innocent. I still prefer the straightforward term. It says exactly what it means," Dan remarked. "He interviewed me for a story," she added. "We flirted, both of us. He was a tall, attractive guy, a former college football player who stayed in good shape. We had a few lunches, and things progressed from there. Oh, he was very skilled in bed. Good to know, Dan replied. Did you always engage with him in our bed? She lowered her gaze. I assume you're aware he was married and had 2 young kids. These will be cherished memories you and he have left for them, Dan said with a harsh tone. I don't want a divorce, Dan, please. I'll do whatever you want. Counseling if you want, please, she pleaded. And why should I care about what you want, Dan retorted. You had a 3-month affair with that jerk. You slept with him in our bed. He died in our bed. That's probably going to be all over the news tonight. Damn it, woman, the kids and I will be ridiculed forever because you couldn't keep your legs closed. Fred Desmond's death from an apparent heart attack while in bed with a woman. Not his wife dominated the news on 3 of the 4 main television stations in Lansing. Desmond's own station merely acknowledged that the 29-year-old died from an apparent heart attack. That night, Dan moved into the guest room. He would never sleep in that bed again. Penny was terminated from her job due to the negative publicity surrounding her affair with Desmond and his subsequent death. She knew the board had no other options if they wanted to maintain their funding. Moreover, her longtime partner, Larry Richards, phoned her to terminate their relationship, hurling a barrage of insults to tarnish her character, among other grievances. You damn slut. How many other guys were involved with your disgraceful behavior? We're finished, you know, was just one of the offensive statements he made during the brief 5-minute call. Penny remained relatively silent throughout the conversation. The following week, she was served with legal documents at her workplace. Dan, her husband, sought full custody of their children and presented written requests from the kids expressing their desire to live with him. He informed the judge that despite affording the mortgage on their house, he and the children planned to relocate in anticipation of a strongly negative public reaction. Upon returning home that night, Penny appeared despondent, but neither her husband nor her children attempted to console her. They had been facing ridicule daily since the news broke about Desmond's death. Amidst the turmoil in her life, Penny scarcely noticed that she missed her next menstrual cycle. By the time it happened again, accompanied by nausea, she realized she was pregnant. A home pregnancy test confirmed her suspicion. Do you truly despise me this much, God? She uttered aloud to herself within the confines of the bathroom. She waited until the family sat down for dinner before revealing her pregnancy. She winced when Dan choked on his food upon hearing the news. She knew he was contemplating whether the baby could be his, potentially binding him in marriage. While she considered it fortunate, Dan clearly did not share the sentiment. I highly doubt the child is mine. We'll conduct a DNA test next month, Dan asserted, shattering Penny's hopeful expression. Do you not trust me? She asked incredulously. Have you given me any reason to trust you recently? He retorted. When Dan Mattern's lawyer requested DNA from Fred Desmond's widow to compare with Penny's unborn child, she was displeased. The attorney clarified that if the child proved to be Fred's, his estate might have to contribute to child support. Despite understanding Dan's stance, Maggie Desmond couldn't help but feel unhappy about the situation. Stupid damn woman, she silently cursed to herself. The testing occurred at the 3-month milestone. Surprisingly, neither Dan nor the late Fred matched the DNA results. Upon receiving the test results, Dan angrily confronted Penny. Really, Penny? He shouted. How many guys were you cheating on me with, you promiscuous person? Penny's lawyer had to obtain a subpoena to acquire the DNA sample from Larry Richards, which ultimately matched. Mrs. Larry Richards was far from pleased to discover her husband's involvement with Lansing's most notorious individual and the ensuing financial responsibilities for the next 18 years. Penny's pregnancy by Larry made Dan's bid for custodial parent status a straightforward win. During a conversation about asset division, Dan inquired about the duration of the affair. Penny, blushing, apologized once again. What else is new? Dan pondered to himself. Larry and I were romantically involved for over a year, meeting once or twice every 2 weeks. Given my part-time job, it was relatively easy to slip away during the day. You worked all day, always trusting me completely. I betrayed your trust, Dan. I'm truly sorry, Penny confessed, but not sorry enough to stop or avoid taking on a second lover. Seriously, Penny, 2 lovers. Am I that inadequate in bed that you needed 2? Dan questioned. Penny could see the pain in Dan's eyes, fully aware that she was the source of his anguish. You're an amazing lover, Dan, she replied. It wasn't about you, it was all about me and my weakness. I found Larry interesting, and that led to us being intimate. Honestly, the physical aspect was enjoyable, but it was just casual, for fun. It had no connection to love. In my mind, I could separate it from what you and I shared. After the initial encounters, I stopped feeling guilty because I never took anything away from our relationship. I was always there for you, whenever you needed. Does that mean I got leftovers sometimes? Dan blurted out, suddenly feeling nauseous. Penny hesitated and looked away. She didn't need to respond. Dan abruptly stood up, rushed into the bathroom, and vomited violently. Penny followed him, pausing in the doorway. Does that mean I sometimes ingested semen from you? He asked between heaves. Maybe, a bit, Penny croaked. But I always cleaned myself up as best as I could before you came home, and I never imposed anything on you. It was only when you insisted. I always told you I never turned you down. Dan heaved again into the stool. Once she was reasonably sure he was finished, Penny handed him a damp washcloth. While Dan was cleaning himself up, he pondered how his life had deviated so drastically from its initial path. He first encountered Penny at a Michigan State party during their junior years. She was a petite girl with small, perky breasts, long blonde hair, and vibrant green eyes, while he was a tall, slender math geek with curly brown hair and an affable smile. Both had some sexual experience prior to meeting. From a single date, their relationship evolved into marriage. They were perfectly compatible in every aspect, particularly sexually. In the early stages of their marriage, nothing seemed off-limits in the bedroom, especially before the arrival of their children. Penny exhibited a significant sexual appetite, and Dan made it his life mission to fulfill her every desire. As time passed and their family grew, the frequency and intensity of their sexual encounters diminished. To inject some excitement, the couple committed to a monthly special date night. Over the last couple of years, Dan deeply contemplated his marriage. Did he overlook signs from Penny indicating a need for more intimacy? Could she genuinely love him while engaging in not 1 but 2 extramarital affairs? How could she justify such actions as separate from their marriage? It was a lot to process, but the reality remained unchanged. An 18-year marriage had succumbed to becoming another statistical casualty. Dan's children fully grasped their father's wish to relocate to another town. In the weeks leading up to the end of the school year, their classmates' comments were harsh. Social media platforms were equally unkind, even coining an unflattering yet possibly accurate nickname for their mother. Sex killer MILF. Despite the objections from his children, Dan arranged several sessions with a psychologist recommended by his attorney. Interestingly, both of his kids developed a liking for Dr. Charlotte Puhaka, a woman in her 30s. She's quite cool for a shrink, remarked his daughter. And she's not bad to look at, Dad, added his now teenage son, playfully raising his eyebrows. I'm paying good money for you to talk to her, not drool over her, Dan reminded his son. Though Dan initially dropped off his kids for their first session, he didn't meet Dr. Puhaka until the second one. Observing her, he had to concede that his son's judgment on her beauty was accurate. Dr. Puhaka, with her long blonde hair, deep blue eyes, alabaster skin, and long legs, seemed to have the kind of looks even Thor would appreciate. After the children's session, Dan and the psychologist had a brief meeting. He concurred with her assessment that he too could benefit from several sessions. Recognizing his severe trust issues, Dan wasn't certain if he could ever overcome them. Dan participated in 12 sessions, the same number as his children. He hoped that the resilience of youth would allow his kids to overcome their issues much more quickly than he could overcome his own. He shared this sentiment with the psychologist, who reassured him that he could continue seeking her assistance whenever he felt the need. "But then we won't be able to go on dates if I'm your patient," he remarked with a smirk. "While that may be true, you're jumping to conclusions," responded the doctor, maintaining a not unfriendly demeanor. Dan didn't hastily re-enter the dating scene, whether with Dr. Puhaka or anyone else, despite receiving expressions of interest from several women acquaintances. Even with alimony from Dan, half of the couple's assets, her share of the house sale proceeds, and child support, Penny found it necessary to secure at least a part-time job after the birth of her second son to sustain herself. She, too, moved out of town, ensuring she stayed away from the town where the rest of her family now resided. Additionally, she reclaimed her maiden name and adopted her full formal name, going by the moniker Penelope Rhodes. She took pride in maintaining her weight during pregnancy and swiftly returning to her pre-pregnancy weight. Nonetheless, she refrained from entering the dating scene, despite numerous opportunities. Some advances came from men who recognized her as the sex killer MILF, even though she had dyed her hair brunette. They expressed their interest in the challenge of pursuing a romantic encounter with her. The first time it occurred, she broke into tears, and the second time she fled from the man. At her new workplace, no one seemed to recognize her as the infamous sex killer MILF, and if they did, they were courteous enough to keep it to themselves. As a 43-year-old single woman juggling a newborn and a part-time job, her schedule left little room for a social life. Despite the challenges, she managed to reconnect with her parents and rebuild her relationship with them, ensuring her third grandchild wasn't punished for the mother's past mistakes. Dr. Charlotte Puhaka was taken aback when Dan Mattern called her after more than 6 months of silence since concluding his therapy sessions. Although he had expressed interest in a personal connection before, he hadn't followed through, leading Charlotte to assume he had found someone else. Breezily, she greeted him with, "Hello, Dan. I thought maybe you lost my number." Dan explained, "No, I was just giving us both some time to move past the doctor-our-patient dynamic, and also to prove that this isn't some kind of rebound thing." Charlotte couldn't help but smile. Patients often formed attachments to their therapists, especially male patients, but Dan seemed different. Charlotte was pleased, as she had found him interesting during their therapy sessions and considered him someone she would like to know better. Plus, it didn't hurt that she found him handsome and sexually appealing. Dan experienced a delightful surprise when he picked up Charlotte for their date the following Friday. While she had always presented herself in a professional manner during their previous encounters, on this occasion she opted for a more casual and noticeably alluring look. Charlotte wore a mid-thigh jean skirt, a tight white crop top revealing a few inches of her toned stomach, and 3-inch heeled sandals. Attempting to maintain composure, Dan couldn't help but unabashedly appreciate her appearance as he greeted her at the door. "I assume my outfit meets your approval?" she casually remarked as she strolled past him towards his car. Yeah," Dan replied, trying to keep pace with her and opening the car door for her. "Oh, traditional manners. I like that," she purred. "In that case, you can credit my mother when you eventually meet her," he quipped. Charlotte smiled to herself, having been on enough dates to value the small gestures that many men often overlooked, such as opening doors. For their dining destination, they chose a high-quality barbecue restaurant that also featured selections from a local distillery. Initially feeling a bit awkward when offered a large bib by the waitress, Charlotte observed other patrons wearing them and decided to accept. Dan, appreciating the practicality, eagerly took his bib as well. After discovering that Charlotte had consumed alcoholic beverages, Dan decided to order a whiskey sampler for both of them, along with a glass of ice water. Taking care to advise Charlotte to sip her whiskey, he proceeded to enlighten her about the specific type of whiskey in each shot glass, detailing tasting notes for each. Charlotte expressed her admiration for his knowledge of spirits and how well the whiskey complemented the barbecue. "You're quite the connoisseur," she teased, her tone conveying playfulness. "You're like a liquor sommelier." "Guilty as charged," he replied. Penny leaned more towards wine. "I prefer distilled spirits." Dan hesitated and cringed slightly when mentioning his ex-wife, especially to someone who used to be his therapist. Don't worry about that. It's okay to talk about her, Charlotte reassured calmly. She was a significant part of your life for 20 years. It's natural for her to be in your memories. Don't suppress those memories or feel guilty when they surface. With time, they'll fade, especially as you create new memories with new people. Damn, I didn't expect us to be on the clock tonight, he joked. We're not, she said, playfully slapping his arm. After finishing the meal, Charlotte noticed barbecue sauce stains on her bib. This really saved my blouse, she commented while removing the bib. It would have been embarrassing to walk around the rest of the evening with barbecue sauce on my top. I would have volunteered to clean the blouse with my tongue. Remember, my mother taught me manners. Dan chuckled. Ah, Mr. Chivalry, Charlotte remarked as Dan waggled his eyebrows. Dan had informed Charlotte that they would head to a music club after dinner. Assuming it would be a country western venue following their barbecue restaurant meal, she was taken aback when they arrived at a jazz club. Jazz, huh? I would have bet on country. I thought we'd be line dancing the night away, she remarked. Dan chuckled and shook his head, saying, No country, no hip-hop, no gospel. Screaming guitars are always good, blues good, jazz good. I'm a man with definite tastes. Do I fit into your definite tastes? Charlotte asked, making air quotes as she spoke. Most certainly, he replied. At the end of the evening, Dan received a chaste kiss. Upon returning home, he found both of his children waiting for him in the apartment's kitchen. Good date, Dad? Ellie asked with a big grin. Did you keep your hands to yourself and act like a gentleman? Bobby inquired with a matching grin. Give me a break here, guys. This is the first date I've had in more than 20 years. God, I'm out of practice, Dan admitted. Both kids exchanged grins before turning them on their father. I'm not going to help you, Dad. You're on your own here, Ellie giggled. But we do approve of your date. We both think Dr. Puhaka is great. Don't screw this up, Dad, Bobby said seriously. Dan and Charlotte were wrapping up their fourth date in 2 months, sipping Bailey's Irish cream coffee in Charlotte's living room, when a serious expression appeared on her face. Dan, wouldn't you think about going on dates with other women, maybe just for comparison? I'm worried that you're too focused on me and might miss out on someone you could really get close to, Charlotte suggested. What if I've already found someone I really like? He replied decisively. And I'm definitely fixated on you. Charlotte blushed and smiled as she took the coffee from Dan's hand. She lifted him to his feet and kissed him passionately. He returned the favor and she led him upstairs to her bedroom. In her bedroom, Charlotte kissed Dan passionately, guiding him to the bed, eventually pushing him onto it. When she began to undress him, he reached out and ran his hands over her blouse, causing a prolonged moan. Their clothes were thrown off with equal haste, and he pulled her towards him, causing them both to fall onto the bed. A moment of hesitation flashed through Dan's mind when he realized that he had not been intimate with a woman for over a year. However, this thought quickly disappeared when Charlotte bit into him with a searing kiss. Charlotte's senses were overloaded, flashes flashed before her eyes, explosions echoed in her ears, and her body reacted intensely. When she came back to reality, she realized she was screaming and quickly stopped, remembering how to pull herself together. Experiencing the woman's ecstatic cries propelled Dan into a heightened state of passion, engaging his tongue, lips, and fingers. He realized he had missed this more than he had initially thought. The exact moment the screaming ceased eluded him, and he became abruptly aware of the room's silence as the woman's body ceased its contortions. Despite hearing her breathing, he couldn't discern if she had passed out or was simply resting. Char, you okay, babe? He murmured. Receiving no response, he attempted once more, waiting a few seconds before detecting her movement. What was that? She asked unsteadily. You okay? Pretty sure. That was amazing. Can we do that some more? Oh yeah, he enthusiastically replied, resuming his attention on pleasuring her. The writhing and exclamations resumed, persisting for another 10 minutes, during which the woman experienced 3 more intense orgasms, though she didn't lose consciousness again. Stop, too sensitive, she croaked. Take me now, please. Since you asked politely, he chuckled. Dan ascended the bed, passionately kissed the woman, aligned himself with her entrance, and slowly and affectionately entered. She was moist and exceptionally warm. In a fleeting moment, he pondered when Penny had been as passionate for him. Realizing his thoughts, he hesitated briefly, cleared his mind, and refocused on Charlotte, vowing not to repeat that mistake. As they found a rhythm, Charlotte wrapped her legs around Dan's thighs and they relished each other's bodies. He felt her climax twice more before sensing his own inevitable climax building up. Shifting to their sides after he finished, the two remained intertwined for a while, kissing, giggling, and engaging in soft conversation. "Do you remember when I asked if you didn't want to date other women? Forget that, you're mine." "Dibs," Charlotte declared. Their next outing included Dan's children, spending the day playing putt-putt golf and racing go-karts before dinner at a Mexican restaurant. Ellie, Bobby, and Charlotte instantly connected, bringing a constant grin to Dan's face as he enjoyed their conversation. Despite the 10-year age gap between Dan and Charlotte, it was hardly discussed as they made wedding plans a year later. However, when the topic of children arose, Dan expressed concerns about his age for starting another family. Charlotte desiring at least 2 children, and Dan compromised on 2. Dan thought to himself, "Happy wife, happy life." Dan and Charlotte sat in the pediatrician's waiting room with their 1-year-old daughter, anticipating the child's first annual exam. A familiar face emerged from the office, accompanied by a young boy. Surprised, Penny uttered, "Oh, Dan. Hey," as she glanced at Charlotte and the baby. "Hi, Penny. It's been a long time. Is that your little guy?" Dan inquired. The last time Dan and Penny shared a space was 4 years prior, during the signing of their divorce decree. Despite some new lines on her face and approximately 20 extra pounds, Penny still looked good to him. Observing Dan, Penny noticed gray speckles in his hair but realized he seemed to be about the same weight and hadn't aged a day. She speculated that his natural and unforced smile might be connected to the pretty blonde woman holding the baby, perhaps the reason for his perpetual youthful appearance. Penny introduced her son, Will, who was now 5 years old, and Dan presented Genevieve, their daughter. Dan then introduced Charlotte as his wife to Penny, saying, "Kaka Char, this is my ex-wife, Penny." The two women scrutinized each other. Penny was still grappling with the revelation that Dan had another child when she deduced that Charlotte was likely 10 years her junior in Dan's. Charlotte stood up and extended her hand. Penny hesitated before accepting the gesture. "It's very nice to finally meet you. The kids speak highly of you," Penny remarked. Charlotte simply nodded. Dan understood that his wife was gracious, but she wouldn't falsely compliment his ex-wife, as it wasn't true. In Charlotte's presence, Ellie and Bobby only spoke about Penny's health. Dan had instructed his children not to discuss their mother in his presence, and they respected his request. Penny observed the baby and commented, "She looks just like Bobby when he was a baby. Bobby seems to be a very protective big brother." "He's grown into quite the young man," Dan replied. "And Ellie has become quite the young woman." "They appear to be, from what little I see of them these days," Penny acknowledged. Noticing Dan's expression, she added quickly, "I'm not blaming them for not visiting more often. I know they're busy. I'd still like to see them more. I am their mother." Charlotte lowered her gaze, hoping the other woman wouldn't notice. She wasn't ready to reveal to Penny that both Ellie and Bobby had been addressing her as Mom for the past 2 years. Feeling the need to break the awkward silence, Dan spoke up. "I hope this is just a routine checkup. I hope everything is going well for you and your son." Penny sensed the hesitation in mentioning her son's name. She assumed Ellie and Bobby must have discussed Will occasionally, and she hoped Dan had simply forgotten. Dan noticed her eyes clouding over and felt a pang of guilt. Opting for honesty, he admitted, "The kids and I rarely discuss you. You are their mother, and I'm grateful they have you in their lives to whatever extent they choose. However, the understanding is that we seldom talk about you at home, almost never. You broke my heart, and I felt the need for a clean break from you. The kids understand it completely. I don't have any knowledge about your life post-separation." "Wow," Penny half whispered. "We shared 18 good years together, and you can just shut me out of your life as if our marriage never happened. Like an annulment. That's harsh. You made your choices. Now I make mine to move forward with my life. I've moved on and live in the present, not dwelling on the past, Dan replied. So as I mentioned, I hope everything is going well for you. Penny recoiled, taking a step back as though Dan's response had physically struck her. It was one thing to be disliked, it was an entirely different experience to be pushed to the sidelines. Yeah, kinda, mostly, she eventually replied. I work part-time at a library and Will is in kindergarten. Occasionally I go out on a date. Not many men are interested in seriously dating a woman in her 40s with a young child. I know. My fault. I didn't mean for you to go there. Dan winced visibly. Well, I guess that's my signal to leave, Penny said. Nice to meet you, Charlotte. Take good care of him. He's a good man. I forgot that once. And look where that got me. Penny took her son's hand and exited the waiting room. Dan self-consciously smiled at his wife. I know. You don't have to say anything. Her mistakes led her to this moment. Not my problem. I won't lose a minute's sleep over her, Dan stated. You know I'm not your therapist 24/7, Charlotte replied. Sometimes I'm just your wife, the mother of your baby. Now give me a kiss and stop analyzing me. Just love me. I can do that, he said.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!